Around the world, the fight for human rights is entering one of its most difficult chapters in decades. From war zones where civilians are buried beneath the rubble of their own homes, to prisons where political opponents disappear without trial, to streets where peaceful protesters are beaten simply for demanding a voice. The promise that every human being deserves dignity, freedom and protection is being tested every single day. The challenges are growing faster than the world's ability to respond. The United Nations, long seen as a guardian of international human rights, is facing renewed questions about whether it has the authority, the resources and the political support needed to confront governments accused of serious abuses. As powerful nations clash over conflicts in places like Gaza, Sudan, Ukraine and Myanmar and elsewhere, human rights have increasingly become entangled in geopolitics, leaving millions of ordinary people caught in the middle. At the same time, civil society organisations, journalists, lawyers and human rights defenders are coming under growing pressure. Around the world, governments are introducing tougher laws, expanding surveillance, restricting foreign funding and tightening controls over independent media and non-government organisations. Many activists now face harassment, imprisonment or exile simply for documenting abuses or speaking out on behalf of vulnerable communities. Women campaigning for equality, Indigenous leaders protecting their land, environmental activists challenging powerful interests, and journalists exposing corruption are increasingly finding themselves treated as enemies rather than the defenders of society. The humanitarian consequences are impossible to ignore. Families forced from their homes by conflict often discover that safety remains out of reach. Children grow up knowing war before they know peace. Schools become shelters, hospitals become battlefields, and entire communities lose not only their homes, but their sense of security and hope. In many countries, economic hardship, climate disasters, and political instability are combining to create new human rights emergencies, stretching humanitarian agencies beyond their limits. Every statistic represents a life interrupted, a family separated, or a future placed on hold. Yet despite these enormous challenges, human rights defenders continue their work, often at great personal risk. Across every continent, ordinary people continue to document abuses, support victims, and demand accountability. Their courage serves as a reminder that while institutions may struggle and political leaders may disagree, the determination to defend human dignity remains one of humanity's strongest forces. The question now is whether the international community will match that courage with meaningful action before more lives are lost and more freedoms disappear.
Recent months have highlighted just how interconnected today's human rights crises have become. The UN Human Rights Office continues to warn about worsening conditions in conflict zones, including Gaza, Sudan, Myanmar, Ukraine and Haiti, while humanitarian agencies struggle to reach millions of civilians in desperate need. Human Rights Watch has also reported growing concerns over attacks on humanitarian workers, restrictions on aid deliveries, arbitrary detention, attacks on journalists, and the shrinking space for independent civil society in many countries. At the United Nations itself, debates continue over how effectively the international system can respond when major powers are divided over conflicts and accountability. Human rights experts argue that investigations into alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity must continue regardless of political pressure, warning that failing to uphold international law risks encouraging further abuses elsewhere. Beyond armed conflict, technology is creating new human rights challenges. Governments are increasingly using sophisticated surveillance tools, facial recognition, and digital monitoring to track activists and suppress dissent. At the same time, misinformation and online harassment are making it even harder for journalists and human rights defenders to operate safely. Despite these pressures, humanitarian organisations continue to deliver aid, document violations, and support survivors. Their work remains a reminder that protecting human rights is not only about holding perpetrators accountable, but also about preserving hope for those whose lives have been shattered by violence, repression, and injustice.
Human rights were never meant to be ideas reserved for times of peace or prosperity. They exist to protect people when governments fail, when conflict erupts, and when power goes unchecked. Millions of people are relying on those protections more than ever. Yet many feel abandoned by the system that it often moves too slowly while suffering spreads too quickly. The courage shown by aid workers, journalists, lawyers, and ordinary citizens reminds us that the defence of human dignity does not begin in international courtrooms or in diplomatic meetings. It begins with individuals refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice. The challenge for the international community is no longer recognising that a crisis exists. It is finding the political will to act before another generation grows up believing that human rights are promises made on paper, but too often rarely honoured in practice. This is Breaking Silence.